I was 24 years old the summer Calhoun Briggs fell in love, and I have never once told it right. I've tried around fires in bunkhouses, leaning on bars in 3 territories, and every time it comes out either too funny or too soft, and neither one is the truth. The truth is it was both at once, and it happened so slow and then so sudden that by the time any of us understood what we were watching, it was already over and done, and Calhoun was a different man. Not a softer man, exactly, just one who had somewhere to put what he'd been carrying. I'll try to get it right this time. Calhoun ran the Harrow Creek outfit out of Sutter Flats, Wyoming Territory in the summer of 1877. There were 9 of us on the payroll, wranglers, a horse handler named Peck who was half-deaf and entirely devoted to a paint mare called Duchess, and me, the youngest, who had hired on the previous October with 1 season's experience and more confidence than sense. We moved cattle. That was the work. We moved them up from the south pastures in spring, held them on summer grass in the high country, and brought them back down in the fall. And in between we fixed fences and argued about the weather and tried not to aggravate Calhoun, who had opinions about how things should be done and expressed them without raising his voice, which was somehow worse than shouting. He was 48 that summer. He'd been running cattle in Wyoming Territory for 11 years, before that in Kansas, before that in Texas, before that, and here the record got thin and the stories disagreed. What was certain was that he had a partner once, a man named Gil Rourke, and that Gil had died of a fever outside Cheyenne in 1871, and that something in Calhoun had gone quiet after that. Not mean, not broken. Just settled into itself, the way a river settles after the snowmelt is done and the banks are dry. He was fair and he was steady and his word was absolute. He did not talk much. He did not drink much. He read, which surprised men who didn't know him and stopped surprising men who did. He kept a small Bible and a battered copy of something by Thoreau in his saddlebag. And on evenings when the work was done, he would sit apart from us with one or the other, and read by firelight with the same concentration he brought to reading a draw of land for water. He had not, to any of our knowledge, spent meaningful time in the company of a woman since Gil died. He hadn't seemed to want to. He was a man who had arranged his life to want very little, and he was good at it. The posting was Peck's idea. I say that because Calhoun would never have admitted it. If you'd asked him later, and men did ask him carefully after a drink or two, he'd say he'd put the posting out himself, practical necessity. The outfit needed a cook and the nearest town was Sutter Flats, and Sutter Flats ran to 3 saloons, a livery, a dry goods, and 14 men for every woman, which were not good odds for finding a competent cook who wanted ranch work. All of that was true. But the idea had been Peck's, and it had come about because Peck had a cousin in Ohio who ran a small employment agency for domestic work, and Peck had written to this cousin, whose name was Mrs. Beaumont and who was, by all accounts, efficient and plain-spoken and very good at her job. And Mrs. Beaumont had placed a posting on Calhoun's behalf in 3 Ohio papers, reading as follows: Wanted, cook and housekeeper for working cattle ranch, Wyoming Territory. Applicant must be hardy, practical, unafraid of hard work and remote conditions. Wages fair. Inquire to Mrs. A. Beaumont, Columbus, Ohio. This was accurate as far as it went. What it did not specify was that the ranch house was a 2-room structure that had been built for function and not comfort, that the outfit spent 4 months of every year not at the ranch house at all, but moving between camps on open range, that the nearest neighbor was 11 miles south and not given to socializing, and that the man who ran the outfit had the conversational warmth of a fence post. Mrs. Beaumont sent back one reply. Her name was Nora Vane. She was 34 years old, had taught school in Gallatin County for 6 years, and had, as she wrote it, a firm grasp of cooking, an interest in new country, and no particular attachment to comfort. She said she was practical. She said she understood remote. She said wages could be discussed on arrival. Calhoun read the letter twice, handed it to Peck, and said, "Write back and tell her the terms." Peck wrote. Nora Vane wrote back, agreed. We didn't know anything else about her until the stage pulled into Sutter Flats on the 14th of July. I was the one Calhoun sent to meet it. He was busy, or said he was, and sent me with the wagon and instructions to bring her, and whatever goods she'd brought out to the outfit, which was camped 7 miles east on summer grass. I tied the wagon outside the stage office and waited on the boardwalk in the afternoon heat, and when the stage rolled in I stepped up to help with the luggage and looked to see who'd climbed down. 3 men came out first, then a drummer in a city coat, then Nora Vane. She was tall. That was the first thing. She stepped down from the stage, and she was nearly as tall as me, which I was not expecting, though I don't know why I had an expectation at all. She had brown hair pinned up under a hat that was practical enough, a gray traveling dress that had dust on it and wasn't apologizing for it, and she was carrying in her left hand a small cream-colored parasol, folded, which she was using to prod a trunk out of the boot of the stage with an air of focused determination. She looked up when I approached. Her eyes were dark and level, and she did not smile the way women sometimes smile at a young man who comes to help, the relieved, grateful smile. She just looked at me and said, "You're from the Harrow Creek outfit." "Yes, ma'am, Denny Holt. Mr. Briggs sent me." She looked past me at the wagon, then back at me. "How far?" 7 miles. "Is the road rough?" I thought about lying and decided against it. "Some." "Good," she said, which was not the answer I expected. "I've been sitting for 4 days. I'll take rough." She had 2 trunks and a crate of books, this last item wrapped in canvas and roped so careful it was clearly not an afterthought, and she directed the loading of all 3 with a precision that left me feeling supervised. When everything was up, she climbed to the wagon bench without waiting for a hand, set the parasol across her knees and said, "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Holt." I was ready. We didn't talk much on the drive out. She asked about the outfit, how many men, what the work schedule was, whether the ranch house had a proper stove. I told her, 9 men not counting Calhoun, sun to dark 6 days, the stove was adequate. She nodded to each thing and looked out at the country, which was, I'll say this, worth looking at in July. The grass was high, and the sky was that particular Wyoming blue that seems deeper than it has any right to be, and the light on the hills was long and golden, and Nora Vane took it in without saying anything for a long while, and then said, quietly, as if to herself, "Well." Just that, but it was the right kind of well. We came into camp as the sun was dropping. Calhoun was at the far side talking to Peck about something to do with the north fence line, and when he heard the wagon he turned and walked over. He walked the way he always walked, unhurried, like a man who had decided long ago that hurrying was a choice and had declined it. He came to the side of the wagon and looked up at Nora Vane. She looked down at him. There was a pause. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, and I have never forgotten it because in those 3 seconds, watching them look at each other, I had the distinct and baffling feeling that something had already been decided, and neither of them knew it yet. Calhoun said, "Miss Vane." She said, "Mr. Briggs." He said, "Welcome to the Harrow Creek outfit," with no particular warmth, the way he said most things. She said, "Thank you. I'd like to see the kitchen set up before the light goes." He blinked. It was, I think, the first time I had ever seen Calhoun Briggs blink at a thing a person had said. He recovered immediately. He said, "Peck'll show you." "I'd prefer you show me," she said. "You run the outfit. I need to understand what I'm working with." Another pause. Then Calhoun said, "All right," and walked toward the cook station, and Nora Vane climbed down from the wagon without help and followed him, and I stood there holding the reins feeling like I'd watched the opening move of something that was going to take a while to play out. I was right. The first week was an education for everyone. What Calhoun had expected, and what, in fairness, the posting had implied, was a practical, quiet woman who would manage the cooking and the camp without requiring conversation or accommodation, who would be present in the functional sense and absent in every other. What he got was Nora Vane, who was practical, certainly, and hardy without question, and competent at the work in ways that silenced the outfit's initial skepticism faster than any of us anticipated. But quiet she was not. Not loud either. It wasn't noise, it was presence. She had a way of being in a space that made the space aware of itself. She asked questions. She had opinions about things, and she expressed them in the same direct, declarative way she did everything, as if she had considered the matter and reached a conclusion and saw no reason to hedge it. She talked to the men, all of us, not just me, not just Peck, who she'd taken an immediate liking to, as if we were reasonable people she was interested in knowing something about. This was unusual in a cattle camp. Calhoun watched all of it from a careful distance. She was good with the food, better than good. The previous cook had been a man named Arlo who had made everything taste of wood smoke and defeat, and after 2 days of Nora's cooking, there was a subtle but definite improvement in the morale of the outfit that had nothing to do with the food directly, and everything to do with the fact that a meal now tasted like something someone had thought about. She made biscuits that Peck called the finest thing produced in Wyoming territory, and Peck was not a sentimental man. But she also had opinions about the camp layout. She mentioned them to Calhoun on day 3. "The cook station faces west," she said, when she found him going over the week's supply list. "Afternoon sun comes straight in from that direction. I'm working in direct heat for 4 hours at the worst part of the day." Calhoun looked up from the list. "The station's been there 2 seasons. "I understand that. I'm suggesting it should face north." "Moving the station means moving the supply lines." "Yes," she said, as if this were a manageable fact and not a reason to stop talking about it. There was a silence. The rest of us within earshot found reasons to study the ground. Calhoun said, "I'll think on it." She said thank you and went back to the station. He moved it on day 5. He didn't announce it. He and Peck and 2 of the other men shifted the whole setup at dawn before she woke up, and when she came out and saw it facing north, she looked at it for a moment and then looked at Calhoun, who was saddling his horse and not looking at her. She said, "That's better, thank you." He said, and rode out to check the north pasture. Peck caught my eye and looked quickly away, but not before I saw him working very hard to keep his face straight. That was the shape of it those first 2 weeks. She would identify something and say so. He would resist, consider, and quietly do the thing. She would thank him without making more of it than it was. He would not acknowledge that anything had happened. And the camp around them slowly became more comfortable and better organized than it had been. And the men of the Harrow Creek outfit, who were not sentimental and were not in the habit of noticing such things, noticed. The trouble came at the end of the 2nd week. A man rode in from Sutter Flats, a rancher named Galt who ran beef 2 valleys over and had heard, through the way things traveled in that country, that Calhoun had a woman at camp. Galt was not a bad man, but he had a particular way of talking about women, in the 3rd person, that implied they were a category of livestock requiring management, and he arrived at camp in the early afternoon and addressed himself entirely to Calhoun, while Nora was not 20 feet away at the cook station. "Heard you brought in a woman for the camp," Galt said. "Cook," Calhoun said, "Miss Vane. How's she working out?" Calhoun looked at him. "Well, they're a disruption, usually," Galt said, with a friendly authority that suggested he was sharing professional wisdom. "Men get distracted. Work suffers." Nora had not looked up from what she was doing. Calhoun said, "My men's work hasn't suffered." "Give it time," Galt said and laughed. There was a pause. Then Calhoun said, "Miss Vane." She looked up. "This is Galt. He runs beef in the South Valley." She said, "Mr. Galt," politely without warmth. Galt touched his hat. "Miss." Calhoun said, "Galt's heading back to his spread. You'll stay for supper, Galt, or you're on the road." It was said in a tone that made clear which option was preferred. Galt read it correctly. He stayed for exactly 1 cup of coffee and left before supper. After he rode out, Nora came and refilled Calhoun's cup without being asked. He was looking out at the range. She set the pot back on the fire and said, without turning around, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Calhoun said. She turned then and looked at him. He was still looking at the range. She said, "Thank you anyway." He nodded once slowly, and that was all of it. But I was watching, and I saw the back of his neck go red, and I filed that away. The 3rd week she asked to ride out with the North Fence crew. Calhoun said no. She asked why. He said the North Fence ran through rough country, and they'd be moving fast. She said she could ride. He said that wasn't the point. She asked what the point was. He looked at her for a long moment, the look he used when he was deciding how much of what he thought to say, and then he said, "The point is you're the cook." She said, "I'm also a person who has been on this camp for 3 weeks and has not been further than that tree line. The work doesn't need me until supper. I would like to see the country." Another silence. These silences between them had become a thing the outfit tracked, the way you track weather, watching for the way it resolves. "Take Peck's horse," Calhoun said finally. "Peck's riding the south line today. He won't need her. Stay with the crew. Don't get ahead of them." She said, "I won't." She rode out with us at first light, me and 2 others, Teague and a big quiet man from Missouri we called River, and she was, as she'd said, a capable rider. Not flashy, not trail-trained exactly, but she sat a horse with the ease of someone who'd grown up around them and didn't need to think about it. She kept pace. She didn't complain about the terrain, which was broken and steep in places and demanded attention. She asked Teague about the fence line, what they were repairing, how the posts were set, and Teague, who was not much for conversation, found himself explaining the whole system to her while she listened, and occasionally asked a question that showed she'd understood the previous answer. On the way back, she rode beside me for a stretch and said, "Mr. Briggs has run this outfit a long time." 11 years in Wyoming, I said. Before that, Kansas and Texas. Alone. I thought about that. He had a partner, Rourke, died in 71. She was quiet for a moment. "He doesn't talk about it." "No, ma'am." "He doesn't talk about much." "No, ma'am." She looked out at the country. "He listens, though," she said, "better than most." I didn't have an answer for that because it was true and I hadn't thought about it before. Calhoun did listen. He just didn't perform listening, didn't nod and agree and reflect things back. He absorbed, and sometimes later he'd act on what he'd heard in a way that made it clear he hadn't missed a word. "Yes, ma'am," I said. She nodded, still looking at the hills. When we rode back into camp, Calhoun was at the corral. He watched her ride in. He didn't say anything. She handed Peck's horse off to River and went directly to the cook station and started on supper, and Calhoun watched her go, and then he turned back to the corral and started doing something with a piece of fence tack that probably didn't need doing. I unsaddled my horse and thought about what Nora had said. He listens better than most. That was something. That was a woman who had been paying attention. The thing that cracked it open happened at the end of August. I will try to tell it as plain as it was. We'd moved the herd up to the high summer pasture, 2 days' drive north, and the outfit was camped at a place we called the Basin, a broad shelf of land below a ridge, grass good, water from a creek that ran cold and clear off the snowfields above. It was beautiful country, the kind that made you understand why men came west and never found their way back. In the evenings, the light hit the ridge and turned everything gold, and the air was thin and clean, and the stars came out so clear and close they seemed like something personal. On the 3rd night at the Basin, after supper, most of the men had turned in early because we had a long day ahead of us working the east edge of the herd. I'd stayed up to check a piece of tack I'd been meaning to fix, and Calhoun was at the fire with his Thoreau, and Nora was sitting just outside the firelight on an upturned crate, which she'd carried 10 feet from the cook station, watching the ridge. I don't think either of them knew I was there. I was in the shadow of the wagon, quiet with my tack work, and they were, I don't know, not together exactly, but in the same space in a way that had a shape to it. After a while Nora said, "What are you reading?" Calhoun looked up, a pause as if he was deciding. "Walden." "I taught Walden," she said. "Gallatin County, Ohio, 8 grades in 1 room." He looked at her over the book. "Any of them take to it?" "2," she said. "One girl who is almost certainly doing something extraordinary somewhere, and a boy who I think understood it the way you understand something true before you have the words for it." Calhoun looked back at the book. "That's the best way to understand something." "I think so," she said. Then, after a moment, "I miss the school." He didn't say anything for a while. Then, without looking up from the page, "Why'd you leave it?" The question was quiet and direct. He asked it the way he did everything, no preamble, no softening. Nora was quiet a moment. "I was good at it," she said. "The teaching. I liked the children and I was good at it, and I thought for a long time I thought that was enough. Being good at a thing you like." She paused. "And then one morning I woke up and I thought, what else? What is there that's mine? The school was mine in one way, but the town, the life around it, that wasn't mine. It was the shape that had formed around me while I was paying attention to other things. And I thought if I'm going to live somewhere, I'd rather choose it, even if it's hard, especially if it's hard." Calhoun had stopped turning pages. He was looking at the fire. She said, "That probably sounds foolish." "No," he said. He said it immediately, which was not like him. "It doesn't." A silence. The fire shifted. The ridge was dark against the stars. Calhoun put the book down on his knee. He reached into his breast pocket. I had seen him do this before, always this pocket, always with the same careful quality of motion, and he brought out something small, held it with 2 fingers. From where I was I couldn't see it clearly, but I had been close enough to him over months to know it was there. Something flat and pressed, something he touched and put away again with the care of a man keeping a promise. He looked at it for a moment, then he put it back. Nora had seen. I could tell by the stillness of her. She didn't ask. She let it be what it was. And that restraint, that understanding that some things don't need pulling at was, I think, the moment. Not the words before. The way she saw it and left it alone. Calhoun picked up his book again. He read another page. Then he said, without looking up, "There's a school needs a teacher over in Birch Creek, 20 miles east. Started last fall, haven't filled the post." She looked at him. He kept reading. She said, "I didn't say I was looking for a school." "I know," he said. "I'm saying it's there." A pause. "Why are you telling me that?" He lowered the book and looked at her. The firelight was on his face and there was nothing guarded in it for once, nothing managed. He said, "Because if you stayed, I'd want you to have something of your own here, not just the camp." The quiet that followed, that was different from all the other quiets. It was the kind that means something was said that can't be taken back, and both people know it, and neither of them is moving away from it. Nora said, "That's a very practical thing to say." "I'm a practical man." "You are," she said. She was almost smiling. "And yet." He looked at her steadily. "And yet." "I put down my tack work. I did it slowly, so as not to make noise. I got up and walked, very quietly, to the far side of the wagon, and then around the back of it, and away toward the horse line, where I stood for a while in the dark listening to the horses breathe and looking at the stars and feeling like I'd witnessed something I didn't have a category for yet. When I came back to my bedroll 20 minutes later, the fire was low. Calhoun was gone. Nora was gone. Each to their own place, and nothing improper had happened, and yet the camp felt entirely different than it had the morning before. She stayed. I want to be precise about that, because the story of a woman who stays is sometimes told as if staying is a surrender, as if she has been won or worn down, and that was not what happened with Nora Vane. She stayed the way she did everything, deliberately, with full knowledge of what she was choosing. At the end of the summer contract, when the herd was moved back down and the outfit rode back to the ranch house, and Calhoun told her plainly that her term of employment was complete and he would pay her the agreed wages and arrange her transport back to Sutter Flats, she had listened to all of it with her hands folded on the kitchen table and then said, "I'd like to renegotiate." He said, "Renegotiate?" "The terms," she said. "I'd like to stay through the fall and winter." "Terms to be discussed." He looked at her. "Why?" She looked back at him. "You know why." Another pause. These pauses had become, over the summer, a kind of language between them, not silence exactly, but a compression of things they'd both gotten better at hearing. He said, "I'm not a man who's easy to be around." She said, "I've noticed I'm still here. The winters are hard." "I came from Ohio," she said. "I know about winters. The country." "Mr. Briggs," she said, and there was a warmth in it that stopped him. "I would like to stay. I'm asking if you want me to." The question was direct and clear, and it did not leave room for indirect answers. And Calhoun was, I learned over the years, that this was always his shape, a man who responded to directness with directness. He had no other gear. He said, "Yes, I want you to." "Then we'll work out the terms," she said, and stood up to put the kettle on. That was all. No declarations, no grand gestures, two people who had looked at something plainly and decided yes. But there was a thing that came after. About a week later, I was in the barn. It was morning. The light was coming through the gaps in the boards in long yellow stripes. Calhoun came in, not for anything I could see, just came in and stood near me while I worked, and after a while he reached into his breast pocket and brought out the thing he kept there. He held it out. I took it, careful as I would take something I didn't fully understand the value of. It was a wildflower. Pressed flat and dry, the color mostly gone, but the shape still there, some small 5-petaled thing that had once been bright. The stem was wrapped in a strip of paper so thin you could almost see through it, and on the paper, in a hand that wasn't Calhoun's, were 6 words, "For my son. Come home someday." I held it for a moment, then I handed it back. He put it in his pocket. I said, "Your mother." 61, he said, "before I went to Kansas." "Have you gone home?" "She passed in 64, he said. "I was in Texas." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say. He said, "I've carried it since. Seemed like I thought if I held on to it, it meant the going wasn't permanent, that I was still heading somewhere." He paused. "I haven't been heading anywhere in a while." He was looking at the barn wall. Then he said, "She would have liked Miss Vane." He said it so quietly I almost missed it. I said, "Yes, sir, I think that's right." He nodded once, tucked the flower back into his breast pocket, and went back out to the day's work. Fall came fast that year, the way it does in Wyoming. You wake up one morning and the aspens are yellow and the air has changed, and there's no arguing with it. The work shifted into the harder rhythms of fall, the last drives, the fence checking before winter, the laying in of what the outfit would need through the cold months. Nora settled into the ranch house with an efficiency that was something to watch. She had opinions about the storage system, which she reorganized without asking, and about the window in the east wall, which needed fresh caulking, and about the layout of the main room, which she improved with no tools but her own sense of how a space should work. Calhoun watched all of this with an expression I had never seen on him before. It took me a while to place it. It was something between bewilderment and satisfaction, the face of a man watching something be built that he'd given up expecting. He didn't say much. He never did. But he came in for supper earlier than he used to. He lingered over his coffee. Once I saw this through the window. I wasn't meant to. He picked up one of her books from the table and looked at the spine and opened it to a page and stood there reading for a moment, and then set it back down with the same precision she would have, the same respect for the object. Small things, the kind of things that don't make a story by themselves, but that add up to something you can see from a distance. One evening in October, the first hard frost coming in off the north, he came in to find her at the table with the lamp on and a letter half-written in front of her. He hung his coat. He poured his coffee. He sat down across the table from her, which he hadn't done before. He usually took the chair by the fire. He said, "Writing home." "My sister," she said. She was still writing. "What do you tell her?" She finished the line she was on, then looked up. "The truth, that I'm further from Ohio than I expected in every sense, that the work is real and the country is remarkable, and that I am," she paused, choosing, "that I am where I mean to be." He looked at her across the lamp. She said, "Is that all right?" He said, "It's all right." She went back to her letter. He drank his coffee and read his Thoreau, and the frost came in outside and the fire held steady, and neither of them needed anything more than what was in that room. I wasn't there that night. But Peck was. He'd been in to borrow something and had come back out quick and quiet and found me in the barn and told me what he'd seen, which was only those two people at a table with a lamp between them. He told me about it the way you tell someone about a thing you're glad happened in the world. Then he said, which was Peck's version of a lot of things, and went to find his paint mare, and I stayed in the barn and thought about all of it. I thought about Calhoun carrying that pressed flower since 1861, because it meant the going wasn't permanent. I thought about Nora leaving Ohio because she wanted something that was hers by choosing, not by accident of staying put. I thought about all those silences that turned out to be a language, and the way she'd seen him take the flower out by the fire and had known, without being told, to leave it be. Two people running hard in parallel for a long time, and then something, not a collision, not a drama, just the slow accumulated weight of two lives in proximity, bringing them into the same direction. In the spring, I heard through Peck that Nora had taken the teaching post in Birch Creek, 20 miles east. She rode out 3 mornings a week and back in the evenings, and the other mornings she was at the ranch house, and the Harrow Creek outfit went on in the way it always had, except that there was a lamp in the east window that hadn't been there before, and the main room had been rearranged to work better, and suppers were a thing you looked forward to. Calhoun, as far as I ever knew, never said another word about it to anyone. What was between them was between them, and that was the shape of it, and the shape was right for who they were. The last time I saw him in the way I'm describing, the way that stays with you, was my last fall on the Harrow Creek outfit, before I moved on to my own spread further south. It was an October evening, cold, the light failing early. I was heading to the barn, and I passed the window of the main room, and I looked in, the way you do without thinking. He was at the fire. She was at the table with her papers from the school. Neither of them was talking. The lamp was between them and the fire was behind him, and the room had the particular gold and settled look of a place that has found its purpose. He reached into his breast pocket. He took out the flower. He looked at it for a moment, not long, just a moment. Then he set it on the table between them carefully and went back to his fire. She looked at it. She picked it up with 2 fingers, the way you'd handle something valuable, and looked at it for a while. Then she set it down again in the same spot and went back to her papers. That was all. But I stopped walking. I stood outside in the cold for a moment, and I thought, that's the whole of it. That's what he'd been carrying, and he set it down, and she understood what it meant, and now they're both home. I don't know how else to say it. I've tried, in bunkhouses and around fires and leaning on bars in 3 territories, and the words always come out either too soft or too funny, and neither one is the truth. The truth is it was a pressed wildflower on a kitchen table, and 2 people who finally had somewhere to put what they'd been carrying. and the lamp in that east window never went dark again.